They should never have left me alone. Or maybe I shouldn't have let them go. God, I have no idea. I just wish that I would have known how often strangers watch us in our own homes. This weekend was difficult enough. I was taking a significant other to a family reunion for the first time ever, shifting whispered rumors of my lesbianism into flesh and blood fact. Things started okay, before everything went to crap. We are renting a beach house. My aunt and her teenage daughters took one bedroom, while my mom shared a room with Lynn and me. A raised loft within the bedroom gave us a modicum of privacy, at least. That's where everything started. My need to go on daily runs, even on vacation, is one of the many reasons that my family thinks I'm so strange. But Lynn was getting along pretty well with everybody else, so she told me to go ahead and meet them in the waves when I was done. Running relaxes me. As I did a quick 5 miles, I finally began to feel that things might work out. The inner tension that had lurked inside me for a lifetime was finally being addressed. Not released, but addressed. The thought of spending time with my girlfriend and my family like I was normal caused me to tear up just a little. Once I finished, I raced back up to the loft to change into my swimsuit. And that's when he walked into the house. Noticed that there weren't any men on the weekend's roster, but the raspy, foreign breath combined with the heavy thud of his boots on the wooden floor made it clear that it was a male walking down the hallway, headed to my bedroom, which only had one door, and that door opened. His breathing was labored. I was sure that my heart was beating loud enough to give away my position, but I did my best to hide. I curled into the farthest corner of the loft and I tried not to breathe. Step, step, step. He paced back and forth in the room beneath me, traversing the same patch of floor. I wasn't close enough to see him even if my eyes weren't winced shut, but the sound of his movements painted a picture clear enough to illuminate every action. He sat down heavily on my mom's bed and exhaled a long and rattling sigh. And then he spoke. Allison. I'm Allison, by the way. Neither of us moved. My heart had nearly stopped by the time that he stood up again. The man resumed his pacing back and forth across the floorboards below. And then he approached the wall and he tapped on it. And then the footsteps continued up the wall. I hyperventilated as the heavy thud of the boots worked its way impossibly toward the ceiling. Nothing made sense. The one clear fact was that I needed to leave, but the only exit from the loft was a nearby ladder. There was no way that I would be able to scurry down in time, and so I waited. The footsteps approached the ceiling, and then they tapped against the underside of the loft. I was still too terrified to move, but the footsteps were getting closer. The wooden floor vibrated with each footfall until the man was standing upside down right under me. I was crying silently but uncontrollably as he stopped directly below where I sat, separated from me by just a few wooden planks. I risked opening my eyes. It was a bad decision. Grimy fingers curled around the edge of the loft, wiggling excitedly as they probed closer to me. I closed my eyes tighter than before. And then he laughed. It was guttural, wheezy, and unkind. And that's when the man walked back across the ceiling, down the wall, and out the bedroom door. My survival instincts were torn between never move again and run away forever. The latter won out, and since I hadn't changed from my running clothes, it seemed like a viable option, My body was shaking badly enough that I nearly fell off the ladder, but I made it down in one piece. Part of me was hoping that I had imagined it all, that I really was as crazy as everybody had assumed, and that I would be free to believe them instead of having faith in the horrifying reality of my own senses. All such silly hope was shattered when I saw the footprints. Several sets traversed the floor, leaving muddy stains in their wake. One set led up the wall. 19 steps crossed the ceiling and then turned around, and 13 headed back to the floor. Hanging from the ceiling was an envelope with Allison written on it. God no, I had no interest in whatever that message read. I ran outside into the sunshine, down the short path toward the beach. I stopped when I found myself alone on the sand. Panicked, I ran up and down the beach in search of my family. When that proved fruitless, I ran back toward the house. Terrified, I searched every horrible corner of the place, even the rooms with footprints in them. I found nothing. Crying audibly now, I dialed 911. There was no service. I went back to the bedroom. The note was still hanging from the ceiling. Slowly, I climbed onto my mom's bed, reached out and plucked it from the string that was holding it in place. My hands were nearly trembling too badly to read it. I have loved watching them sleep. Now I have them for my own. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. Unfortunately, my stomach eventually emptied out. That meant I was once again alone with my thoughts. My family was gone, I had no cell service, and a strange man had left me a note. Okay, Allison, I told myself. There's a way out of this if you look hard enough. I closed my eyes and washed my mouth in the sink. The neighbors, I realized. I'll go to the nearest house and I'll call the police from there. The idea was cool and logical. I could grab Mom's keys, take the rental car, and drive until I found something. Except that Mom specifically told me that the electronic remote key thingy had broken, and that she was going to call a tow truck that afternoon since the car couldn't start. Okay, no problem, I told my steadily rising heart. I'm still in my running clothes. I'll just head out on foot. And that's when I realized that I didn't recall seeing any houses on my run. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced myself to remember as much of the run as I could. Nothing. I only recalled dirt trails. The panic was winning at this point. The only option left was to run until I found something or someone that could help. I would then tell them to come back here and help me look for my missing family. Wait, my head spun. I couldn't remember where here was. Did Mom just not tell me a street or a city name? I was so anxious about bringing my girlfriend to meet my family that I didn't pay attention to anything about our current location. I racked my brain, but the harder I thought, the more it retreated, like trying to remember a dream upon waking. Something was missing. A piece of my memory was just empty. A crash from the bedroom sent me flying to my feet. I was already teetering on the edge of passing out, and that jolt nearly pushed me over. But I couldn't run away, I simply had nowhere to go. I didn't have any weapons, and I had never used one, so there was nothing left to do but creep toward the bedroom, with the unholy footprints all over the walls and ceiling. I pushed open the wooden door, wincing at the creak. Maybe everything would be back to normal when I stepped inside. Nope. The footprints were on every unnatural surface in the high-ceiling wooden room. I felt crowded on every side as though I had walked into a stadium with 1,000 invisible mute beings. Oh crap. The ladder was on the floor. Someone had knocked it down while I was in the bathroom. Someone was nearby. and that's when I noticed the note. It sat on one of the rungs. It had been placed there since the ladder fell, some point within the last minute. It was folded neatly. There was no doubt that I was supposed to read it again. I didn't want to go farther into the room. It felt like I was diving into a narrow underground water tunnel. My eyes nearly popped with the pressure as I moved forward, silently begging my running shoes to stay quiet while I moved. I didn't want to pick up the note. I did not want to read it. But I was unable to conceptualize a world with any other option. Eyes stinging, I crouched and I stretched my arm as far as possible, as though I would be able to get near it without getting near it. I closed my eyes and I batted at it with my fingertips, once, twice, 3 times before snatching it up, and then I turned and darted from the room. We sense the presence of others even if we can't see or hear them. Being inside a packed stadium feels different from sitting inside of an empty one, and that's true even with your eyes and ears shut. That sensation followed me until I got out of that bedroom and closed the door behind me. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, I unfolded the note. I couldn't steady my hands enough to read it, so I leaned against the wall and sank into a sitting position, and I pressed the paper onto the floor. The letter was written in a childish scrawl. "Go wait in the cellar if you want mommy to live." I wanted to cry and vomit at the same time, but my head was too numb. I must have sat still for 10 minutes. What is there to do when you receive an impossible request with no second option? My answer was simple. Tell myself 19 times in a row that I refuse to obey. Explain that aloud to the page another 13 times and then stand up. I was going to the cellar. I didn't tell myself that I was going to the cellar because that would be crazy. I just put one foot in front of the other while facing that general direction and denied what had to be done. It felt eerily similar to the dystopian revolt brewing in my gut when I walked into Mom's house to tell her that I was dating a girl. All of my instincts had informed me to self-preserve by avoiding a potential source of deep pain. Go wait in the cellar if you want mommy to live. Go and wait in the cellar if you want mommy to live. I wiped the first tear from my eye as I stepped outside. The beach cottage was transcendently peaceful, which would have been a beautiful thing if I weren't so alone. I walked around the corner of the house to the cellar door that I had noticed when we had first arrived. My shoes sank just a little into the soft, dewy morning mud as I stayed close to the wall. I stared up at the cobalt sky, listening to the seagulls, trying to get my head anywhere but where I was. The cellar doors were cast in shadow, despite sitting on the sunward side of the house, and my instinct told me to stay away. My feet, however, continued forward, making sticky sounds in the mud as I went. I stopped 10 steps away from the cellar door and I looked behind me. I don't know why this was necessary and why I was afraid to look, but I was more terrified not to look. There were 2 sets of footprints. One was my set of size 5 running shoes, and the other was of enormous boot prints. The boot prints simply ended halfway between me and the edge of the house, as though the walker had vanished. I was certain they hadn't been there just a few seconds earlier. I wiped away another tear and I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering despite the heat that had plagued me during the run. Approaching the cellar doors, I reached down and felt the weathered wood of the handles. I looked behind me before opening. The muddy boot prints had taken 5 steps closer since I had turned my back. I pulled on the cellar doors. An icy gust rushed over my body as my nostrils were assaulted with the scent of must and rot and sadness. I dropped the doors to the ground, leaving them wide open, and lifted one tentative foot over the first step into darkness. "Don't go in there," screamed every thought in my head. And then I turned around and saw that a muddy boot print had appeared 6 inches next to my own shoe. I scurried down the steps, teeth chattering as I forced myself to breathe through my mouth. At the bottom of the stairs was an open coffin with a note inside. The rest of the basement was too dark to see. I reached a shaking hand down and I lifted the note. Allison was written across in that same childish writing. I opened the letter and I read its contents. "Lie inside and wait for me to bring Mommy out to safety. Keep the lid closed if you do not want her to appear in several pieces." The basement smelled awful. I wiped away tears that had sprung from stress and a stinging stench. Every second that passed was its own kind of horrible as I hoped that I could delay my decision. Then a shadow fell over me. I knew that someone was standing in the open cellar door at my back watching. I also knew that if I turned around I wouldn't see anything, but it would be there. It would be angry if I didn't obey. There's no glory in accepting that every card is stacked against you. Sometimes the only thing left to do is move forward by sacrificing excess hope. I placed one muddy shoe in the coffin. "I'm not really doing this," I told myself. "I'm just putting one foot in." And then I placed the second shaking leg inside. I didn't bother wiping away the tears anymore. I sat down in the coffin, eyes shut tight. It was impossible to force myself to lie flat. And then the first footstep fell on the cellar stairs. It was followed by a second and then a third. The descending shadow covered my eyelids as I fell into a deeper dark. I slinked down into the coffin out of fear, simply to get further away from whatever was coming for me. The space was too narrow for the fetal position, so I crossed my arms over my chest and I kept my eyes closed tighter. The footsteps moved across the cellar toward where I lay. There was no amount of money on earth that could have convinced me to open my eyes and look at the thing above me. That choice became moot as the coffin slammed shut over my head. You can hear silence. We are used to these subliminal reverberations that tell us that we're in a room or outdoors. Have you ever been shut inside of a box? It sounds like sadness. That's the moment when I changed my mind. I wanted out. I opened my eyes, but it was still impossible to see anything as I pressed my palms against the underside of the lid. It didn't budge. I was locked in. All vestiges of calm raced out of me while panic took over as my primary mode of self-preservation. The harder I pushed, the more that I freaked out, which led me to push even harder. The tears were a pure terror now. Tendrils of snarly claustrophobia wrapped their reach around my limbs as my mind refused to save me from hyperventilation. I'm ashamed to admit that if given the choice, I would have traded my mother's life in that moment if it meant that I could break free. My head and stomach lurched as the coffin was lifted from the ground. I had no idea what the heck could move it so powerfully, but there was no way that a human could be responsible. Nausea flooded through me as the coffin rotated, lifting my feet high while my head dipped low. I pressed my hands against the coffin wall above my hair as I realized that I was about to flip upside down, but it was no use. Supporting myself from that angle was impossible. My body weight crushed my head as my face was pressed against the wall while I inverted, legs above the rest of me. I couldn't breathe with my face covered, but my heart demanded more oxygen just the same. The rotation continued until I was horizontal once more, but now the coffin was upside down. Would the lid pop open and drop me out on the floor? If so, there was no way to hold on. I would just have to cover my mouth so that the cement floor didn't explode my teeth in 19 different directions. I tried to control my panic by counting, but I had to stop at 13. The dark coffin was now rotating again, but this time on a longwise axis, which meant that I was turning like a roasting pig on a spit. I scratched at the walls as I spun and spun, feeling like I would never ever stop. None of it made sense. The only certainty was that this was impossible for any living thing to accomplish. Not even 10 people working together could make a coffin move in this way or at that speed. And then it stopped, but my head kept spinning and spinning in the dark. I opened my mouth to throw up again, and that's when I found out that the lid was facing downward. It opened without warning. I had just enough time to cover my teeth. I shrieked as I hit the ground and split open my chin. Rolling away, I barely avoided being crushed by the coffin. It fell where I had just been seconds earlier, splintering on the floor. I could no longer tell what liquid on my face was blood and what was tears. Dizziness prevented me from sitting up as a shadow slid across the cement and stood over me. I wanted to die. I didn't want to be dead, but when that outcome feels inevitable, all of the buildup is just unnecessary drama that the dead aren't obligated to endure. So I didn't even back away when the shadow approached me and knelt by my side, speaking in a shaking, agonized voice. "Allison, I'm so sorry. I thought that I had killed you." I gasped. "Mom?" "We don't have time," she hissed, sliding an arm underneath my shoulders. "We need to move inside. Don't open your eyes, we don't want to make him angry. We've got a long road ahead, Allison, and you're not going to like what you need to do next." "Close your eyes," Mom whispered, "and put your hands on my shoulders so that I can lead you out of the basement." I tried to swallow, but my throat was too dry. "Who's the person that we can't anger?" I responded in a hushed tone. "What will he do if he sees us?" Mom wiped a tear away. "Please, Allison, please, just don't. Do as I ask, I'm begging you." I couldn't speak. Instead, I nodded, sweaty hair bobbing in my face as I did so. Mom reached out a shaking hand and forced my eyes shut, and then she pulled my fingers onto her shoulders and stepped toward the stairs. "This is the hardest part," she offered in a shaky voice. "This is where you need to trust. Now climb." I lifted a leg and found the first step. I expected sunlight to brighten my lids because we can sense a sudden flash even when our eyes are closed. But the world remained pitch black as we rose up the stairs toward the morning sun. We feel the presence of others through tiny changes in our senses, and that's how it feels like we're being watched. That force came in an extreme wave as I walked up the steps. I knew someone was standing behind me, even though there hadn't been anybody else in the basement. "Mom, I'm scared," I groaned. "You should be scared, Allison, but you shouldn't be talking." I shut my mouth. The back of my neck was hot and cold at the same time as we moved up the steps. I noticed that something was wrong a minute later. There were only 10 or 12 steps leading down to the cellar. How were we still climbing? "Mom," I breathed. "What did I say about talking?" she snapped. I nearly opened my eyes. "Don't open your eyes," Mom ordered. We continued to climb. The tickling on my neck grew too thick to ignore, like a slug it interbred with a fine-spined cactus and was lusting after my skin. "It's licking me," I whispered. "Let it," Mom answered. "This will be over soon enough." I forced back a tear. "Are you lying to me?" She proceeded in silence. The prickly sludge continued along my shoulders, across my back, beneath my armpits, cupped my breasts and rolled into my navel, getting so cold along the way that my teeth chattered as it slid to my butt. And then it crawled up my neck so hot that it scalded my skin, as it slid up my cheek and moved into my ear canal, like a hot, thick, slimy, wriggling worm. I needed to bat it away. "Don't take your hands off my shoulders," Mom ordered. I continued with the vileness inside of me. And then I finally felt light against my eyelids. The presence inside me hated warmth. Irritation ran through my skin as it vibrated softly. While the light grew, it moved. The unpleasant caress traveled across my torso, shot up my chest and rolled over my chin, slipped through my lips and tried to force its way down. I wanted to stop it, to yell out, to scream that my body was my own, but I couldn't breathe. I choked and then coughed. It rushed inside of me as I took a breath. Finally, we stepped onto the grass. "Okay, Allison, open your eyes." I did so and screamed. Mom's face was so different that I hated it. Everything was the same. The only change was that odious loathing overwhelmed me when I looked at her. "So don't look at me," she sighed, turning around like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. "Let's go inside." I wanted to ask what in the heck was happening to this house, but I was too distracted with what was happening to me. A hurricane of emotions ran through my chest with no context. I felt joy, rage, victory, blinding anger, and sadness as I followed her inside. My footsteps echoed against the wood. It reminded me of cloven feet moving across an old barn floor. Clickety-clack, even though I still wore my running shoes. I wanted to cry, but I was too happy. Mom stopped, but she didn't turn around because she didn't want me to see her face. "We're about to go into the bathroom. Can you follow my instructions when we do?" "Yes, Mother," I responded, even though I never called her Mother, and it didn't sound like my voice. She hesitated a second longer before opening the bathroom door and stepping inside. I followed her as she reached for a candle by the sink and lit it. The bathroom was small, but an enormous mirror on one wall gave the illusion of size. Mom placed the candle on the counter and faced the mirror. "From now on, only look at my reflection," she commented. "Now close the door and turn out the lights." I focused on breathing. "Is everything going to be okay?" "Allison," Mom responded sharper now. "Close the door and turn out the lights." I closed the door and I turned out the lights, and then I wrapped myself in a hug, clutching my upper arms and squeezing them tight. "You've done a good job of listening to me so far, Allie," she breathed. "Just keep staring at my reflection and nothing else." "What do you see?" My shoulders shook. "Your eyes are the wrong color, Mommy," I whispered. Her reflection nodded. "It's beginning. Hold my hands and keep focused on the mirror. Count up to 19 and then down from 13. Don't look away from my eyes while you do." "Why?" I shot back. "Why is any of this happening? How do you know what to do? What does it have to do with me?" She took my hands in hers and squeezed. "Because you're the one who's going to be dangerous if you disobey," she explained in an even voice. "Now take a deep breath and begin counting. The change is about to happen, and there's nothing that we can do to stop it." "What's the change, Mom?" I asked as my hands trembled in hers. "Part of you already knows," she answered in a steady voice. "Now count up to 19 and then back down from 13. I focused on her wrong-colored eyes that danced in the bathroom candlelight as she squeezed my fingertips. "You can't stop it, Allie, just make the best of it." Mom drew in a deep breath. "Now turn and look at yourself in the mirror." I don't know why I was dreading what I was about to see, but the fear came from an inner place as though my bone marrow was too cold. "There's nothing left to do but face it," Mom whispered. I turned and looked at the reflection of my face dancing in the flames. The desire to cry rose up, but it came from someplace deeper, as though my chest wanted to shed tears. It's wrong, Mom. Staring back was something that looked like me but clearly was not. I don't know how else to explain it. I can tell if an arm belongs to me or to somebody else simply by seeing it. I knew that this image was not my own, and that something else altogether was on the other side. It's not me, Mom, I breathed. I can't explain it, I know, she answered. Don't make it angry. I gazed at the being that looked just like me as it stared through the glass. It blinked when I did, and it had the same frizzy brown hair, and its eyes were wrong. Mom, why does it have red eyes? I gasped in growing panic. This is enough, please make it stop. It's too late to stop, Mom's reflection responded. I turned to face her image because I knew that the sound was coming from the other side of the mirror. Why are you doing this to my family? I whispered. Because you are the part of your family that you can't see. Mom's reflection whispered back. It was difficult to see in the dim candlelight, but something was wrong with the reflection's hands. They were clutching one another just like Mom and I were, but the reflections only had two thick, slug-like fingers on each hand that writhed against each other as I watched. Mom's hands felt cold and slimy in mine, but I didn't want to look, so I continued to stare at the bathroom mirror. Your mother made a deal with me, Mom's reflection explained. I will return your Aunt Josie and even her two daughters, who say terrible things about you and Lynn behind your backs. Upon that return, they will never again see shameful things in you. The cost is that it stays inside you. Mom wouldn't do that, I snapped back. Mom's reflection smiled. Oh, we hurt the ones we love, everybody does it. Betrayal wouldn't be possible if it wasn't based on trust. My eyes burned. Mom loves me. And that's why you hurt each other. Her reflection answered. I turned to face my own reflection, which had obediently mimicked every movement while I pleaded with the mirror. We stared at each other, perfect facsimiles of one another as I considered the sincerity of the tears on its cheeks. Then, as I felt ready to break, my reflection smiled at me without happiness. Allie, Mom shouted, shaking my arms. Allie, come back to me, please. I blinked in the bright overhead lights. What happened to the candle? I mumbled, disoriented. She stared at me sadly and I looked back. I saw it then, love and guilt chasing one another like an Ouroboros tortured over her child like all good parents are. Whatever deal she had made had forsaken me. I guess we'd better go find Aunt Josie, I offered. She blinked and looked away. Yes, I think we should. Mom hung her head low and walked out of the bathroom. I turned to follow. I wondered if I ever really knew my mom or was maybe just finding out who she was. She stopped when we were both in the hall. I read your letter to Santa when you were 6. I don't know if you remember it. That was the first Christmas after Dad left, and I had you write it because I swore to myself that I would make it the most special holiday that you ever had. I was determined to give you whatever you asked for. She let out a small sigh but still didn't face me. Instead, she traced her fingertips along the tattered brown wallpaper. Your letter asked for a new mom because I was never happy, and you figured that losing a father meant you could get rid of your mother as well. I couldn't move. I remembered the letter. Every morning after I read that, I forced myself to think of a new reason to love you before I got out of bed. When we're hurt by the people we love, we find a way to make it work. I didn't wipe away the tear. How many years did you do that? She hesitated for 3 seconds before answering. I never stopped. And then she turned the corner and walked into the living room. I finally brushed tears from both eyes. Then pressing palms against my face, I followed her out of the hallway. I stopped upon seeing Mom standing frozen in the middle of the living room. "Mom?" I whispered. "What are you staring at?" She didn't answer. Slowly, I stepped around her, and inch by inch, the sight revealed itself to me. Aunt Josie and her daughter sat leaning against the living room wall. Their arms and legs writhed slowly, like they were in a great deal of pain but had no energy or will. All three of them had sewing needles protruding from each shattered eye, blood running down their cheeks like cartoonishly excessive tears. Nothing in my life could have prepared me for the experience of stuffing gauze into my cousin's empty eye sockets as they gently moaned. I would have preferred screams to the unsettling hum of utter agony that told me that they could access their pain, but were too far gone to know anything else. "We should call 911, I told my mom as she pressed bandages against Aunt Josie's seething wounds. Mom didn't even spare a glance for me as her arms worked furiously. "You know that won't work, Allison," she snapped. "You must have realized things aren't right in this place, and that we're alone until the end of the process." I wanted to vomit, but the thing that had made its home in my body would not allow me that much control. Whatever had snuck inside me was there to stay. "But where are their eyes?" I stammered. "If we find them, maybe we can, put them back in." I knew my request didn't make any sense, but nothing about the past hour had seemed possible. Mom swallowed. "I'm sure their eyes popped like jelly. All that we can do is stop the bleeding. Now hold still," she ordered while wrapping a bandage around my cousin's head in an attempt to lock the gauze in place. When she finished, I stepped back, my bloody fingers trembling. "I need to wash my hands," I whispered. Mom gently but firmly grabbed both of my wrists. "You can't face the bathroom mirror just yet." Her face was paper white. "Allison, I never told you about your father." I shook my head. "Hey, it's fine. It's not that it's important right now, Mom," I countered while trying to pry away from her grasp. She pulled firmly back on my arms. "It is important, Allie. Please." She pushed in a softer tone. I stared back at her, my jaw hanging low. "Okay." Mom let go of my hands and wiped an eye with the only part of her sleeve that wasn't covered in blood. And then she looked around the living room, across the rug, through the window at the sky and up at the ceiling. Everywhere but at me. When this came for us, what do you mean this? What is it?" She looked ready to cry. "It's just this. Don't question it, Allie. There's no better answer." She wrapped her hands around her waist and stared at the floor. "We were offered a choice," Mom continued in a frail tone. "And?" I asked after several seconds of silence. "We chose." I was more confused than I had been at the start. "What does that mean for us?" She avoided eye contact. "When you face the mirror, you will have to choose too." She dropped her hands and finally looked at me, her face miserable. "I'm so sorry, Allison." She didn't say anything more. Aunt Josie and her agonized daughters moaned softly, but there was no other sound in our world. I didn't know what to do. After a seemingly interminable stretch of nothing, I realized that the only path was forward, no matter how improbable that might appear. So I turned from my mother and walked back into the bathroom. The candle that had been extinguished was inexplicably alight once more, providing the only illumination in the room. I stepped in front of the mirror and stared at my reflection. The door slammed shut on its own accord. I jerked my head to stare at it. "Look at me," the reflection ordered. I could feel its words coming from my own mouth, though I was not the one forming them. Slowly, I turned to face myself in the mirror. I knew that the person staring back wasn't me. She looked like a carbon copy, but it was a different entity whose eyes were the wrong color. The being was clearly happy to see me miserable. "I've been with your family for so long." The reflection continued as I felt it use my throat. "As a child, you told your mother that you were afraid of the dark. Do you know how much it hurt her to lie and say that nothing was watching?" I tried to step away, but my body was locked in place. "She didn't want to prepare you because she was ashamed of the choice that you made." Its smile grew wider. "Your mother hates herself every day because she knows that given the chance, she would do it over again the exact same way." I felt my tongue protrude and lick my lips, like a succulent meal was about to be devoured. "And now it's your turn, Allison. Are you ready?" I felt my head nod, but I didn't control the action. The tears trickling down my cheek were the only influence that I had over my own body. "All the pain that you've experienced today, all the pain your family has gone through, all the fear, it could end right now," the reflection offered. "You would be the last to endure it. I won't haunt the generations to follow if you're strong enough to do what your mother, her parents, their parents, everybody before, was too weak to do." I swallowed, which is how I found that I could control my face once more. "What do I have to do?" I asked in a meek voice. A weak red light suddenly flicked on above the bathtub behind me. I looked over my shoulder and nearly fainted, and then I turned back to face the reflection, which spoke when I looked directly at it. This was its moment of greatest joy. It smiled at me even as tears ran down our collective cheeks. "I'll leave you alone forever if you destroy what you love. Otherwise, I will come for your children as you turn away from them and the shame that your mother feels right now." I couldn't speak. Instead, I slowly turned around once more, shackled by an impossible offer. In the bathtub, unconscious but peaceful, Lynn lay with her hands clasped over her stomach. Sitting on her chest was an ornate, cruel-looking dagger. I could hardly form words. "So you want me to stab her while she's sleeping?" Tears were flowing faster as I spoke. "It's the same choice that your father and I faced," Mom announced from behind me. I struggled to see her while I controlled my head. The rest of my body was still under another being's power. Her face seemed covered in streaks, but she hadn't been crying. A sob burst from my lips as I realized that I was finally noticing the collective years of agony exposing cracks in her soul. "Your dad and I thought that we could handle it. I was right, but he was wrong," Mom continued in a paper-thin voice. "He killed himself on January 9th, 2013. I wanted to wipe the tears from my eyes and snot from my nose, but that was an impossible task. "You said that Dad died in a car accident," I blubbered. "I also promised that I would always protect you," Mom responded. "Parents lie to their children until their childhood world is shattered. It's the way of things." I focused on breathing. For the moment, that's all that I could do. "So Dad didn't love me," I blubbered between gasps. Mom's face was unchanged. I could feel her thoughts, even from several feet away. The lack of reaction wasn't from her inability to care. It was the inevitable result when a too early death severs a connection in which we've invested our souls. "Your father left the engine running in that garage because he underestimated how much he loved you. No parent can understand the magnitude before meeting their child." She drew her lips into a thin white line. "We can't comprehend the significance of our most important decisions until after they're made. Otherwise, we would never move forward. My jaw quivered. So this is where it begins. Either I stab Lynn or I set up the lie for my children right now. It's the way of things, my reflection answered in a high-pitched voice. Its movement was barely visible in the red light, but I could feel my mouth smiling. I tried to close my eyes but couldn't. Lynn and I haven't even talked about having kids. We're only 22. Oh, it doesn't matter. Mom cut me off. This will find whatever children you have. I sobbed again. The inability to control my body while I wanted to break down was pushing me to the edge of a panic attack. Well, then we'll adopt, I yelled. Just get this thing out of me. My reflection shook its head. My own head responded like a puppet. It doesn't matter if you adopt, Mom whispered. That's what your father and I did. My breathing got shallower. What are you talking about? I'm your only child. Mom was silent. I would have fallen on the floor if I had control over my body. Why didn't you tell me, Mom? I'm sorry, she answered in a voice that was barely audible. For everything, I moaned. Am I in hell, Mommy? She gasped softly. I don't know. If you are, well, then we're in here together. I turned slowly around to face Lynn. I'll never have kids. That will end it. If she leaves me then. Tears poured. If you choose not to have children, the reflection responded with glee, then you will become pregnant against your will. Mom and I both sobbed. So, will you do it? The reflection asked in its quietest voice yet. As it spoke, the dagger glowed. I only saw a world designed to engineer pain, and I wondered if killing us both was the kindest act. Love isn't real, is it? I asked, turning my head past the reflection and facing Mom. The only way to save the woman I love is to bring a child into a world that wanted to hurt them before they were born. My entire existence will be shielding that child by lying every day, because giving life is the same thing as giving pain. Mom shuddered. Allison, what do you think love is? And that's when I understood what she was saying. I was lightheaded and there was light, which is how I realized that the bathroom was bright again and I could control my body. Mom reached to hug me, but I didn't respond. She froze and we looked at one another in silence. It can't ever be undone, Mom explained with a defeated shrug. I nodded once. I guess a terrible answer can still be the best one. I grabbed my elbow and stared at my running shoes. Allie, she breathed. You're still my daughter. Am I? You're still my mom, I answered without looking at her. We didn't hug. Something foreign rushed through me. I struggled to understand what I was feeling because introspection proved it to be happiness. I simply hadn't recognized it when I was hurting so much. This thing is still inside me feeling stuff that I don't want to feel. When will it stop? Mom's eyes glistened beneath the bathroom lights. I'm so sorry, Allie, she sighed, but you made a choice. I felt like I was falling, and so I squatted, clutching the tub for support. Mom moved to hug me again, but I held up an open palm. She stopped herself. I shook my head. I haven't yet told Lynn that I love her. Vomit tickled the back of my throat. What if this is the wrong choice? What if 10 years go by before I realize that it's the wrong choice? What if that becomes apparent tomorrow? Mom grabbed her elbow and stared at the ground. Allie, what do you think that love is? I shook, once again unable to control my body, but no longer physically controlled by anything other than my own mind. Why do we love each other then? Mom looked from me to Lynn. I followed her gaze. And then Lynn opened her eyes and held my hand.